Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Soft winds whisper through the ancient forests of Middle-earth, carrying with them echoes of stories long past. The stars shimmer gently above, casting their silver light over lands both fair and wild. Tonight, beneath their watchful gaze, we journey into a tale of wisdom and power, of darkness and light. Close your eyes. Let the world fade away. Feel the warmth of a distant fire, the soft rustling of leaves, the quiet breath of a land that has seen both sorrow and triumph. This is the story of Gandalf, the great pilgrim, the wandering wizard whose wisdom has guided many. But even the wise must face the unknown, and even the strong must stand against the coming storm. As shadows rise and old evils stir, he must journey into darkness once more, into the ruins of Duel, where a forgotten sorcerer waits, waiting to reclaim his power, waiting to reshape the world in shadow. So let the night embrace you. Let the gentle cadence of this tale carry you into the heart of Middle-earth. A story of courage, of battles fought not just with strength, but with wisdom. A story of Gandalf's duel with the Dark Sorcerer. The evening sky over Rivendell was painted with hues of crimson and gold as the sun dipped behind the towering peaks of the misty mountains. The last whispers of daylight shimmered upon the cascading waters of the Bruinen, and the scent of ancient pines lingered in the cool air. It was a peaceful sight, one that had long stood untouched by the chaos of Middle-earth's endless struggles. But that peace was a fragile thing, like the reflection upon a still pond before the first ripple of disruption. And tonight, Gandalf felt that disturbance stirring in the air. He had come to Rivendell seeking counsel, but what he found instead was troubling news. Elrond's halls, always a place of wisdom and comfort, were clouded with a sense of unease. The Elven Lord himself had summoned Gandalf upon his arrival, and the moment he laid eyes upon Elrond's solemn face, Gandalf knew this was no ordinary matter. The winds of the world whisper of a shadow stirring. Elrond spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Duel has not been silent since Sauron's fall. Something lingers in its ruins, growing in strength. My scouts have seen strange lights flickering within its walls, and the air around Mirkwood grows thick with dread. An ill force has risen, though its nature remains unclear. Gandalf leaned upon his staff, his piercing eyes dark with thought. Duel, once the stronghold of Sauron before his return to Mordor. It had been left abandoned, or so they believed, after the White Council's assault drove him out. And yet, Gandalf had never been fully convinced that all was as it seemed. The echoes of dark magic did not simply fade into nothing. They lingered, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Elrond continued, his gaze fixed upon the firelight that flickered in the chamber. A name has surfaced among my scouts. Morgul. At the sound of that name, a cold breath of wind seemed to creep into the room, though the walls of Rivendell should have shielded them from such chill. Gandalf had heard whispers of it before, a name that was little more than a rumor among the forgotten corners of ancient texts. Morgul, the Shadow Sorcerer. It was said that he had once been a pupil of Sauron, not a mere servant like the Nazgul, but a student of his dark arts, one who studied in secret while his master's gaze was fixed upon war and conquest. If Morgul had survived, if he had truly returned to Duel, then Middle-earth was not yet free of the dark sorcery that had plagued it for ages. Gandalf exhaled slowly, tapping the end of his staff upon the stone floor. And what does he seek? That is what remains unknown, Elrond admitted. But the stars tell of unrest. Galadriel has sensed the tremors of his power. If left unchecked, we may find that the fall of Sauron was not an ending, but merely the prelude to something greater. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Gandalf's thoughts raced. If Morgulad indeed returned, he would not do so without purpose. The ruins of Dol Guldur were steeped in dark magic. There were remnants of Sauron's power buried beneath its stones, artifacts, knowledge, things that should have been destroyed but were instead left buried beneath time and ruin. The thought of any sorcerer unearthing such things sent an uneasy chill down Gandalf's spine. "I must go," Gandalf said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Dol Guldur cannot be left to fester in darkness once more. Elrond studied him for a moment before nodding, though there was sorrow in his eyes. "You knew this would not be the end, did you not?" Gandalf chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. "Peace is always fleeting, my friend. That is why we must fight to preserve it while we can." And so, before the night had fully settled over Rivendell, Gandalf made his preparations. He took little with him save for the robes upon his back, his staff, and the wisdom earned through centuries of hardship. He knew the path would be dangerous. He knew that darkness would be waiting for him within the ruined halls of Dol Guldur. But he also knew that if he did not act now, Middle-earth would soon find itself once again under the shadow of an enemy long thought defeated. As he stood at the edge of Rivendell's borders, a voice called out to him. "You do not intend to go alone, do you?" Gandalf turned to see a figure stepping from the trees, Radagast the Brown, his staff gripped in one hand, his ever-present expression of worry softened by a flicker of determination. His robes were as tattered as ever, marked with stains of soil and leaves, and his hair, tangled with twigs and bits of moss, gave him the appearance of one who had been at home in the wild for far too long. Yet, despite his eccentricity, Radagast was no fool. He had fought beside Gandalf before, and his knowledge of the unseen forces of Middle-earth was unparalleled. "This is not a journey for the faint of heart, Radagast," Gandalf warned. Radagast snorted. "Do I seem faint of heart to you? Dol Guldur is a blight upon these lands, and if what Elrond says is true, I would not have you face this sorcerer alone." Gandalf smiled slightly, resting a hand upon Radagast's shoulder. "Then let us be on our way." Together, the two wizards set forth from Rivendell under the cloak of night, leaving behind the warmth of Elrond's halls and venturing into the unknown. The road ahead would be perilous, for the shadows of the past had not yet been fully vanquished. And in the ruins of Dol Guldur, an ancient darkness awaited its reckoning. The night sky stretched endlessly above as Gandalf and Radagast made their way through the valleys that led away from Rivendell. The stars shone brightly, their silver glow casting faint light upon the rugged terrain, but even their brilliance could not ease the weight upon Gandalf's mind. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, but beneath it all, there was something else, something unsettling. It was the same feeling that had settled over Rivendell, a disturbance that whispered of impending darkness. Radagast walked beside him, staff in hand, his long brown robes trailing behind him, occasionally catching on the underbrush. The wizard muttered to himself now and then, as was his habit, whispering words that only the creatures of the wild could understand. His affinity for nature had always been his greatest strength, and Gandalf had no doubt that Radagast could sense the shift in the balance of Middle-earth just as well as he could. "We should avoid the road through the high pass," Radagast remarked, his voice quiet but firm. "The winds speak of foul creatures lurking in the mountains." Gandalf nodded in agreement. "The remnants of Sauron's forces have scattered, but not all have vanished. We do not have time to deal with orcs and trolls when greater threats await us." Instead, they took the longer route, skirting the edges of the misty mountains and making their way toward the outskirts of Mirkwood. It was not an easy path. Steep inclines, dense underbrush, and treacherous footing slowed their pace. But the two wizards pressed on, determined to reach their destination before whatever foul purpose Morgul had planned could come to fruition. The deeper they traveled into the wilderness, the heavier the air became. It was a subtle shift at first, almost imperceptible, but as the days passed, it grew more pronounced. The birds that once filled the air with song fell silent. The wind carried whispers that did not belong to the natural world. The trees, ancient and wise, seemed to lean toward one another as if murmuring secrets between their gnarled branches. Even the ground itself felt different, cooler, almost lifeless, as though something had drained it of its warmth. One evening, as they camped near the edges of the greenwood, Radagast sat by the fire, his face lined with concern. "The creatures of the forest are afraid," he said, stroking the feathers of a small bird that had landed on his hand. "They have seen things moving through the trees, things that do not belong." Gandalf stirred the embers of their fire with the tip of his staff. "Spirits?" Radagast shook his head. "Worse. Shadows given form. Beings that should not walk this world, yet they do. And they come from Dol Guldur." Gandalf frowned. He had long suspected that the darkness within Dol Guldur had not been fully purged, but the idea that such horrors had already begun to spread beyond its ruins was deeply troubling. As the fire crackled and the night stretched on, Gandalf found himself staring toward the distant horizon, toward the unseen specter of Dol Guldur that loomed somewhere beyond the trees. He knew, without a doubt, that something unnatural awaited them there. The next day, as they ventured into Mirkwood, the forest seemed to close in around them. The greenwood had always been an ancient, mysterious place, but this was different. The light barely penetrated the thick canopy overhead, and a mist clung to the ground like a living thing. The trees groaned softly in the breeze, their bark etched with deep scars, as if clawed by unseen hands. They walked in silence, their steps careful and measured. Gandalf held his staff firmly, his senses alert. Radagast, ever attuned to the whispers of the natural world, moved with a cautious grace, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then, the silence broke. A low, guttural sound echoed through the trees, inhuman, twisted, filled with malice. Gandalf and Radagast halted. The sound came again, closer this time. Then, from the shadows, figures began to emerge. They were not orcs, nor were they wraiths, but something in between, twisted forms, draped in tattered black, their faces obscured beneath shrouds of darkness. Their eyes, if they had any, glowed with a sickly green light. They did not carry swords or axes, but long, curved daggers that seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. Radagast inhaled sharply. Morgul's spawn. Gandalf's grip on his staff tightened. These creatures were creations of dark sorcery, spirits forced into physical form by ancient and forbidden rites. They had no will of their own, only a relentless hunger to serve their master. And if they were here, it meant that mortals' influence had already begun to seep beyond the ruins of Dol Guldur. The creatures moved swiftly, gliding over the forest floor with unnatural grace. Gandalf raised his staff, and a brilliant light erupted from its tip, momentarily blinding the creatures. They recoiled, hissing like steam escaping from cracked stone. Radagast moved quickly, whispering to the roots beneath their feet. The ground trembled, and suddenly, thick vines surged upward, ensnaring two of the creatures. They writhed, struggling against the living bonds, but Radagast's magic held them firm. The remaining creatures lunged. Gandalf swung his staff, striking one of them squarely in the chest. The impact sent it sprawling backward, but it did not fall like a mortal being. Instead, its body flickered as if caught between two realms. With a guttural shriek, it reformed and came at him again. Gandalf muttered an incantation, and a pulse of energy rippled outward, sending the creature tumbling once more. But still, they kept coming. They were not alive in the way mortals were. They did not feel pain. They did not fear death. Radagast, his face tight with concentration, slammed his staff into the earth. The ground buckled, and a sudden surge of tangled roots burst forth, driving back the remaining creatures. For a moment, all was still. Then, with an unearthly wail, the mortal spawn dissipated, their forms unraveling like smoke in the wind. Silence returned to the forest, but it was not the peaceful silence of nature. It was the silence of something watching, waiting. Radagast exhaled heavily. That was a warning. Gandalf nodded grimly. Mortal knows we're coming. They did not linger. Their pace quickened as they pressed on through the darkened woods, knowing now that time was not on their side. The further they traveled, the stronger the sense of unease became. The trees whispered, the air thickened, and the very fabric of reality seemed to fray at the edges. By the time they reached the edge of Dol Guldur's ruins, the sun had set once more, though its light would have done little to pierce the gloom that hung over the ancient fortress. The air was cold, lifeless. The very stones of the ruined citadel seemed to pulse with an unseen force, as if the earth itself was trying to hold something terrible at bay. Gandalf stood at the threshold of the fallen stronghold, his gaze dark and unreadable. The time for caution has passed, he murmured. Now, we must face whatever waits within. And with that, the two wizards stepped forward into the heart of darkness. The ruins of Dol Guldur loomed before Gandalf and Radagast like the skeleton of some long-dead beast, its broken towers stretching toward the sky like jagged fangs. What was once a fortress of the necromancer now stood as a monument to ages past, draped in decay and shadow. Yet, despite its ruined state, a presence lingered here, thick and suffocating, like a poison that had seeped into the very stones. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning the darkness that lay beyond the crumbling archway. The walls were covered in moss and vines, their once great carvings eroded by time. But something unnatural had begun to twist through the ruins, blackened tendrils of energy that pulsed like dying embers, remnants of some forbidden power. Radagast shuddered. This place, it is not dead. No, Gandalf murmured. It is waiting. They pressed onward, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The air was stagnant, thick with the scent of damp stone and old magic. Shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners, shifting as though they were alive, curling and twisting at the edges of their vision. Gandalf could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, watching, measuring. Then, the wind changed. A low whisper slid through the air, not carried by breath or voice, but something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of the fortress. The words were indistinct, layered upon each other like voices speaking from the depths of an abyss. Radagast halted, his fingers tightening around his staff. "Do you hear that?" Gandalf did not answer. He knew what this was. This was not merely an echo of the past, this was a summoning. Suddenly, the darkness at the far end of the hall coalesced. The very air seemed to draw inward, pulled toward a single point, and then it unfolded. A figure emerged from the blackness, tall and gaunt, wrapped in robes the color of deepest night. His face was concealed beneath a hood, but his presence was undeniable. Morgul had arrived. The very sight of him made the air grow colder, the torches along the walls flickering and dimming. A pressure settled over the chamber, like the weight of an oncoming storm. Gandalf could feel it clawing at the edges of his mind, a presence that sought to unravel thought and reason. "You have come." Morgul's voice was little more than a whisper, yet it filled the space as though it had been spoken by 100 tongues at once. "And yet, you are too late." Gandalf took a step forward, his grip on his staff unwavering. "Too late for what, sorcerer?" Morgul did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted one hand, his long fingers curling slightly. The darkness around him rippled in response, shifting like a living thing. Then, with a sudden motion, he opened his palm, and the air trembled. A pulse of energy surged outward, sending a deep, resonant hum through the ruins. The walls shuddered, dust and debris cascading from above. The very ground beneath them quivered as though some great force had been disturbed. Radagast gasped, clutching his staff as he staggered back. "What have you done?" Morgul let out a low chuckle. "The foundations of this world are weaker than you believe, old fool. And the echoes of the past still linger in these stones. You sought to drive my master from this place, but you did not erase him. His essence remains, woven into the heart of Dol Guldur. And now, I have called upon it." Gandalf's eyes darkened with realization. "You were trying to summon Sauron's remnants." Morgul's hooded face tilted slightly. "Summon? No. I do not seek to bring back a shadow of what was. I seek to harness it." With that, he lifted his staff, and the ruins came alive. A surge of energy exploded from the ground, twisting upward like blackened fire. The air howled as the chamber around them distorted, the walls stretching and twisting, their ancient carvings warping into images of torment and despair. Radagast stumbled as a deep, unnatural force pressed against him, his breath coming in short gasps. "This magic, it's consuming the very air." Gandalf stood firm, planting his staff against the stone floor. "Enough!" His voice rang out like thunder, cutting through the dark magic that swirled around them. With a sharp movement, he struck the ground, and a burst of white light surged outward. The shadows recoiled, writhing like living creatures burned by the sun. Morgul remained unmoving, but the air around him rippled violently. "Impressive," he murmured, almost amused. "But light alone cannot vanquish the void." He lifted his own staff and slammed it against the ground. Instantly, the chamber was engulfed in darkness. Not mere shadow, but an absence of all light, a void so complete that even the air seemed to vanish within it. Gandalf felt the pull of the abyss, a force that sought to drag him inward, to consume his very essence. He braced himself, focusing his will, but even he could feel the strain. Radagast struggled beside him, his form flickering at the edges, as though he were being pulled apart. Gandalf. With a roar, Gandalf thrust his staff forward, summoning every ounce of his power. A blinding radiance erupted from its tip, slicing through the darkness like a blade. The shadows hissed and retreated, and for a brief moment, the ruins of Dol Guldur were bathed in light once more. Morgul staggered slightly, his robes whipping around him as the force of Gandalf's magic pushed against him. But then, slowly, he straightened, his fingers curling around his staff with renewed purpose. "You are strong," he admitted. "Stronger than most. But even you cannot hold back the tide forever." The darkness coiled around him once more, and this time it took shape, great spectral figures emerging from the walls, their hollow eyes filled with malice. Wraiths, bound to Dol Guldur by ancient sorcery, long since forgotten by the living world. Gandalf exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the encroaching shadows. "Radagast," he murmured. "We must not let him complete the ritual." Radagast nodded, though his expression was grim. "Then we must strike now." With that, the two wizards raised their staffs, readying themselves for battle. The ruins trembled around them, the air thick with the promise of a conflict that would shake the very foundations of Middle-earth. And in the depths of Dol Guldur, the echoes of something ancient stirred, waiting for the chance to awaken once more. The ruins of Dol Guldur trembled with the weight of dark magic. Shadows writhed across the stone walls, twisting and curling like living things. The very air was thick with an unnatural cold, a void where warmth and light struggled to exist. Gandalf and Radagast stood together at the heart of the ruined fortress, their staffs raised high, their forms illuminated by the dim, wavering glow of their magic. Before them, Morgul loomed, a figure draped in void-black robes, his presence a consuming force that seemed to bend the space around him. At his back, the wraiths of Dol Guldur stirred from the very walls, ancient spirits bound by dark sorcery, their hollow eyes flickering with sickly green fire. They were the remnants of the necromancer's past, forgotten by time but never truly destroyed. Morgul lifted his staff, the runes upon it glowing like embers in the night. A low, whispering voice slithered through the air, not his own, but something older, something deeper. It was the voice of the darkness within Dol Guldur, a remnant of Sauron's lingering essence, woven into the foundation of the fortress itself. Gandalf felt the shift immediately. The air grew heavier, pressing against him like an unseen weight. He knew this magic well. It was not merely power, it was corruption, a force designed not just to destroy but to consume. "We must act now," Gandalf murmured to Radagast. Radagast nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Then let us strike first." With a sharp motion, Radagast slammed his staff into the ground. A ripple of energy surged outward, flowing like a wave through the ruins. The vines and roots that had once been dormant beneath the stones suddenly burst to life, surging upward in thick, gnarled tendrils. They lashed out toward the wraiths, seeking to bind them, to pull them back into the earth from which they had been called. For a moment, it worked. Several of the wraiths were caught within the entangled roots, their spectral forms writhing as they struggled against the magic of nature itself. But Morgul merely laughed. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a pulse of dark energy through the air, and the roots withered instantly, crumbling to ash. The wraiths surged forward once more, their hollow mouths opening in soundless screams. Gandalf stepped forward, raising his staff high. A burst of white fire erupted from its tip, sweeping across the battlefield. The wraiths recoiled, their forms flickering and writhing in the light. But still, they did not vanish. These were not mere spirits, they were bound to Dol Guldur itself, tethered to the fortress through sorcery as ancient as Middle-earth itself. Morgul advanced, his movements slow but deliberate. "You cannot fight the inevitable, Mithrandir," he intoned, his voice a hollow echo. "The darkness has already taken root. It grows with each passing moment." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Then I shall burn it from the earth." He thrust his staff forward, and a great pillar of flame erupted between him and Morgul. The fire roared, licking at the stones, casting long, flickering shadows across the ruined walls. The wraiths shrank back, hissing, but Morgul did not retreat. Instead, he raised his staff, and the flames bent. The fire, so fierce and wild, suddenly twisted, pulled inward as if drawn by some unseen force. It curled around Morgul's outstretched hand, twisting and contorting into something unnatural. Then, with a single motion, he cast it aside, and the fire was snuffed out, swallowed by the abyss of his power. Radagast's eyes widened. "Gandalf." "I see it," Gandalf murmured. Morgul was not simply wielding dark magic, he was feeding upon it. The remnants of Sauron's power, the shadows of Dol Guldur's past, the lingering fear and death that had soaked into the stones for centuries, he was drawing it all in, making it his own. This was no mere sorcerer. This was something worse. Morgul lifted his staff once more. The wraiths surged forward, their forms flickering like torn cloth in the wind. They moved with unnatural speed, gliding across the ruined floor, their clawed hands outstretched. Gandalf braced himself, sweeping his staff in a wide arc. A wall of light surged outward, colliding with the wraiths. They shrieked, their spectral bodies flickering, but they did not retreat. They pushed against the light, their forms warping and stretching, their hunger undeniable. Radagast raised his staff, murmuring an incantation beneath his breath. The ground trembled, and from the cracks in the stone, a brilliant green glow erupted. The power of the earth itself surged upward, forming a barrier between the wizards and the wraiths. The spirits recoiled, unable to pass through the ancient magic of nature. For a moment, all was still. Then Morgul laughed. "You fight with light and roots, but you do not understand," he murmured. "You cannot fight the void." With a sudden, violent motion, he thrust his staff forward. The air itself fractured. A deafening crack split through the ruins, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tear open. From the darkness beyond, something vast and unknowable stirred. A great, roiling presence, ancient and endless, pressed against the edges of existence. The wraiths, once aimless spirits, now moved with greater purpose, their forms strengthened by the abyss that Morgul had called forth. Gandalf felt the pull immediately, a force that sought to unravel him, to draw him into the void. He planted his staff firmly, his mind focusing, resisting the corruption that seeped through the air. Radagast staggered, his face pale. "Gandalf, this power—" "I know," Gandalf said grimly. This was not simply dark magic. This was a rift, a tear in the very essence of the world. Morgul was attempting something far greater than mere conquest. He sought to unmake, to reshape, to bend the very laws of existence to his will. And if he succeeded, Middle-earth would never be the same. With a sudden surge of determination, Gandalf raised his staff. "You have played your hand, Morgul," he declared. "Now let me show you mine." A blinding light erupted from his staff, pure and unyielding. It surged through the ruins, cutting through the darkness like the dawn breaking over a long night. The wraiths screamed, their forms dissolving in the radiance. The rift in the air trembled, flickering as if struggling to maintain itself. For the first time, Morgul took a step back. Gandalf pressed forward, his voice ringing like thunder. "You are no master of the void. You are but a servant to powers beyond your understanding." Morgul snarled, his composure faltering. With a desperate motion, he raised his staff, but before he could summon another spell, Gandalf struck. A final burst of light surged outward, engulfing the ruins, washing away the shadows, forcing the darkness back into the depths from which it had come. And then, silence. The wraiths were gone. The void had been sealed. The darkness that had threatened to consume Dol Guldur had been driven back. But Morgul remained. He stood at the far end of the ruined chamber, his robes tattered, his form flickering at the edges. But he was not defeated. He lifted his head, and beneath the hood, two burning eyes glowed. "This is not over," he whispered. Then, with one final surge of darkness, he vanished. Gandalf exhaled slowly, lowering his staff. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The echoes of battle still trembled in the stones of Dol Guldur as silence settled over the ruins. The darkness had been driven back, but Gandalf knew it had not been destroyed. Morgul had escaped, vanishing into the void, his form dissolving into shadow before Gandalf could land a final blow. It was a temporary victory at best. The Dark Sorcerer had tapped into something ancient and terrible, something that could not be undone so easily. Radagast sat upon a broken pillar, breathing heavily. His robes were covered in dust, and his hands trembled as he gripped his staff. He had fought well, but even he had felt the weight of the unnatural power they had faced. Gandalf turned to him. "Are you hurt?" Radagast shook his head, though he looked shaken. "No, but I fear we have merely delayed what is to come." That was no ordinary darkness, Gandalf. He was drawing upon something deeper than I have ever felt before. Gandalf's face was grim. A remnant of Sauron lingers here, woven into the very bones of this fortress. It may not be the Dark Lord himself, but it is enough to fuel the ambitions of one like Morgul. And if he has learned to harness such power, then this is not the last we will see of him. Radagast looked troubled. "What do we do now?" Gandalf was silent for a moment, listening to the ruins, feeling the weight of the magic that still lingered in the air. Then he spoke, his voice measured. "We must return to the White Council. Saruman, Elrond, Galadriel, they must be warned. If Morgul is left unchecked, he may grow into a threat to rival Sauron himself." Radagast frowned. Saruman will not be eager to listen. He believes the great darkness has been vanquished. Gandalf exhaled slowly. Saruman has grown prideful, but he is no fool. He will not ignore a threat of this magnitude, not if it threatens his own designs. And Galadriel will listen. She has always been attuned to the shadows that stir in the world. Radagast nodded, though there was still unease in his expression. "Then we must ride swiftly. If Morgul is gathering power, we have no time to waste." Gandalf agreed. But as they turned to leave, a whisper drifted through the air, curling like smoke. "You will not reach them in time." Both wizards froze. The words had come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a voice that did not belong to the living world. Gandalf turned sharply, staff raised, but the ruins remained still. The wraiths were gone. Morgul had vanished. Yet, the presence of something unseen lingered. It was watching, waiting. Radagast shuddered. "We are not alone here." Gandalf's grip on his staff tightened. "No, we are not." Without another word, they moved swiftly through the ruins, their steps quickening as the weight of unseen eyes pressed upon them. The journey away from Dol Guldur was perilous. The land itself seemed to resist them. Thick fog rolled through the woods, unnatural and suffocating. Shadows moved between the trees, silent and shifting, never fully revealing themselves. The air hummed with the remnants of dark magic, as though the very land had been poisoned by Morgul sorcery. Gandalf and Radagast rode swiftly, their cloaks billowing behind them. The path to Lothlorien was treacherous, but it was the nearest place where they could find sanctuary. If anyone could offer wisdom on what they had faced, it was Galadriel. The forest grew darker as they pressed on, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. Gandalf felt it in his bones, something was moving against them. And then, without warning, the attack came. A shriek tore through the silence, high and piercing, echoing through the woods like a blade scraping against stone. Shadows burst from the trees, black figures moving with unnatural speed, their hollow eyes gleaming with an eerie green fire. The wraiths had followed them. Gandalf reacted instantly, raising his staff. A burst of white light erupted from its tip, driving the creatures back. Radagast followed suit, summoning roots from the earth to ensnare their spectral foes. But these wraiths were stronger than before. They did not simply fade in the light. They resisted, pushing against the magic, their forms flickering but holding shape. "They have been strengthened," Radagast gasped. "Morgul has bound them more deeply to his will." Gandalf gritted his teeth. There was no time for hesitation. With a sweeping motion, he sent a wave of fire roaring through the trees, forcing the wraiths to scatter. The momentary opening was all they needed. "Ride!" Gandalf commanded. They spurred their horses forward, tearing through the forest at breakneck speed. The wraiths pursued, gliding over the ground like dark phantoms, their hollow cries echoing through the night. The trees thinned as they neared the borders of Lothlorien. A golden light shimmered in the distance, the first sign of the elven realm. "Just a little farther," Radagast urged. But the wraiths would not let them escape so easily. The largest of them, taller than the rest, surged forward, its clawed hand outstretched. The very air around it darkened, and a blast of unnatural cold surged toward Gandalf. It struck like a wave, chilling him to the bone, seeking to drain the very life from him. With sheer force of will, Gandalf turned in his saddle, lifting his staff high. A great burst of light erupted outward, crashing against the wraith and sending it hurtling backward. The creature shrieked, writhing in agony, but it did not vanish. It had grown too powerful for that. Then, as if sensing that its prey was slipping away, it let out one final, bone-chilling scream. The other wraiths joined in, their cries merging into a single, dreadful chorus. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, they retreated. Gandalf and Radagast did not stop to question it. They pressed on, their horses galloping at full speed until at last they crossed into the realm of Lothlorien. The golden trees of the elven wood stretched high above them, their leaves shimmering like starlight. At the border, elven sentinels emerged from the trees, their bows raised. But when they saw who approached, they lowered their weapons. "You have come in haste, Mithrandir," one of them said. "The lady is expecting you." Gandalf exchanged a glance with Radagast. Galadriel had foreseen their arrival. That meant she had also sensed the darkness that was rising. Without another word, they rode deeper into the woods toward Caras Galadon, where the Lady of Light awaited them. But even within the safety of Lothlorien, Gandalf could not shake the feeling that they were already running out of time. Morgul had not been defeated. He was only beginning. The golden glow of Lothlorien shimmered in the moonlight, its trees standing tall like ancient guardians against the encroaching darkness of Middle-earth. Even here, within the realm of Galadriel, Gandalf felt the weight of the battle he had fought. Dol Guldar's corruption had stretched far, and though it had been beaten back, it had not been vanquished. Morgul had fled, but his presence was not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. Radagast rode beside him, his expression still troubled from the encounter in the woods. The wraiths should not have been able to pursue them so far. That they had meant only one thing: Morgul's power was expanding beyond the confines of Dol Guldur. As they approached Caras Galadon, the great city of the Galadrim, golden stairways and silver bridges wound through the vast trees. The elves who stood sentinel watched with keen eyes, their hands resting lightly on bowstrings, but there was no tension in their stance. They knew who had come. At the highest platform of the city, in a hall of living wood and flowing light, Galadriel and Celeborn stood waiting. Gandalf dismounted, his robes still dusted with the remnants of battle. He stepped forward, inclining his head respectfully. "Lady Galadriel, Lord Celeborn." Galadriel's gaze, sharp as moonlight on water, rested upon him. "Mithrandir, you have been in shadow." Gandalf nodded. "The darkness at Dol Guldur was deeper than I anticipated." He turned to Radagast. "But you should hear of it from both of us." Radagast stepped forward, gripping his staff tightly. "We battled a sorcerer, one who has taken command of the wraiths that remained in Dol Guldur. He calls himself Morgul." Celeborn's eyes darkened. "A name unknown to us." Galadriel's expression did not waver. "No, not unknown. Merely forgotten. A whisper in the dark corners of history, where only echoes remain." Gandalf looked at her sharply. "You know of him?" Galadriel did not answer at once. She turned, stepping toward the great silver basin that sat at the center of the chamber, the mirror of Galadriel. She raised a hand over the water, and the surface rippled, light twisting in unseen currents. The air grew heavy, and an image formed. A city, ancient and gleaming with silver spires, standing beneath a twilight sky. It was a place Gandalf had not seen for ages, but he knew it at once. Ostinedil, the city of the elves in a region lost in the Second Age. In the vision, figures moved through the halls of a great forge. One stood apart from the others, his robes dark against the light of the fire, his eyes fixed on the molten metal before him. He spoke with the master smiths, with Celebrimbor himself. But there was something wrong in his bearing, something twisted. The vision shifted. Fire engulfed the city. Armies of orcs poured through the gates, their weapons dripping with the blood of elves. The figure in dark robes stood on a ruined balcony, watching with cold detachment. Then, behind him, another shadow loomed, greater, darker. Sauron. The vision shattered, and the water of the mirror stilled. Galadriel turned back to Gandalf and Radagast. Morgul was once a servant of Sauron, long before the War of the Last Alliance. He was among those who walked the halls of a region, learning the craft of magic and metalwork. But he did not seek knowledge as others did. He sought only power. Radagast exhaled sharply. Then he is older than we thought. Gandalf's expression hardened. And far more dangerous. Celeborn stepped forward. But why has he resurfaced now? Galadriel's voice was calm but firm. Because the world has begun to forget the darkness. And in forgetfulness, evil takes root once more. Gandalf nodded. Sauron was defeated, but not destroyed. And the remnants of his power linger still. If Morgul has found a way to tap into that power, then he may seek to raise a force unlike any seen since the Second Age. Radagast looked troubled. We saw what he could do. He nearly opened a rift in the very air of Dol Guldur. If he had succeeded, Galadriel's eyes darkened. He seeks to tear the fabric of this world, to unmake and reshape it in his own design. A silence fell over the chamber. Then, Celeborn spoke. What must be done? Gandalf took a deep breath. We must call the White Council. This is beyond what any one of us can face alone. Galadriel inclined her head slightly. You wish to bring Saruman into this. Gandalf did not miss the subtle note of doubt in her voice. He is still the leader of the council. And he possesses knowledge of the enemy's arts that none of us do. Radagast shifted uneasily. He will not be pleased. No, Gandalf admitted. But he will listen. Galadriel studied him for a moment before finally nodding. Then it shall be done. Messages will be sent to Rivendell and Isengard. Elrond must be informed and Saruman summoned. She turned back to the mirror. For a moment, her gaze was distant, as though she were looking beyond the present into the possibilities that lay ahead. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. But you must know this, Mithrandir. Morgul will not wait. Even now, he moves. Gandalf met her eyes. Then we must move faster. Galadriel stepped forward, her presence radiating calm but undeniable power. I will strengthen the borders of Lothlorien. The darkness will not easily enter this land. But you must go to the others. If we are to face Morgul, we must do so united. Gandalf bowed his head in gratitude. Then we leave at first light. Radagast sighed, running a hand through his disheveled beard. More riding, more chasing shadows. I had hoped to return to my woods after this. Gandalf placed a hand on his shoulder. The shadows are not done with us yet, old friend. Radagast gave a tired smile. No, I suppose they never are. As the night deepened over Lothlorien, Gandalf stood at the edge of the city, looking toward the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond those trees, beyond the hills and rivers of Middle-earth, Morgul was gathering his strength. The battle at Dol Guldur had only been the beginning. The true war was yet to come. Mourning in Lothlorien was unlike mourning anywhere else in Middle-earth. The golden light of the sun filtered through the mullein trees, bathing everything in a glow of eternal autumn. Yet, despite its beauty, Gandalf could not shake the weight of the task before him. The darkness was stirring again, and it would take more than elven magic to stop it. He and Radagast had spent the night resting in the high halls of Cars Galadon, their weary bodies given a reprieve from the long battle at Dol Guldur. But sleep had not been peaceful. Gandalf's mind was filled with visions, whispers in the dark, a shadow moving across Middle-earth, and the unmistakable presence of Morgul. The Dark Sorcerer was watching them, waiting. When dawn broke, the wizards were already prepared to depart. They stood before Galadriel and Celeborn one last time, receiving their blessings before setting out. "The roads grow more perilous," Celeborn said. "You will be hunted." "We already are," Radagast muttered, shifting his grip on his staff. Gandalf turned to Galadriel. "Have the messages been sent?" She nodded. "Rivendell has been informed. Lord Elrond will make his way to the appointed place." "And Saruman," she hesitated, her piercing gaze searching Gandalf's face. "Saruman has given no reply. But he will come. His pride will not allow him to ignore a summons to council." Gandalf exhaled slowly. "Then we must move quickly." The journey to the White Council's gathering place was long, stretching across leagues of Middle-earth. Gandalf and Radagast rode swiftly, their steeds carrying them through winding forests and across open plains. The land was still fair, but something had changed. There was an unease in the wind, a heaviness in the air, as if the very earth knew that darkness was stirring once more. Days passed in hard travel. They did not stop for long, pausing only to let their horses drink from cold rivers or to eat a small meal before pressing on. Even Radagast, usually one to speak to the birds and beasts along the way, was quiet. When at last they neared the council's meeting place, a secluded valley hidden deep within the foothills of the misty mountains, Gandalf felt a weight lift slightly from his chest. Elrond would be there. Galadriel had confirmed it. The wisdom of Rivendell would be needed now more than ever. But as they entered the valley, Gandalf immediately sensed that something was wrong. The air was too still. The birds had gone silent. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a voice rang out. "You have ridden far, Mithrandir, but perhaps not far enough." Gandalf's hand tightened around his staff as a figure stepped forward. Saruman. The white wizard stood tall, his white robes flowing like silk in the dim light. His dark eyes studied Gandalf with something unreadable, curiosity, perhaps even amusement. But there was also something else. Something colder. "Saruman," Gandalf greeted, masking his unease. "You received the summons." Saruman gave a slight nod, but there was no urgency in his demeanor. "I did. Though I must wonder, Gandalf, if you have not grown overly concerned with phantoms. The Dark Lord has fallen. The world is changing, and yet you still cling to the ghosts of an old war." Radagast scoffed. "Phantoms? You call the wraiths that chased us mere phantoms?" Saruman turned his gaze to Radagast, as though just now acknowledging his presence. "Radagast, it has been long since you concerned yourself with anything beyond your woodland creatures. And yet, here you are, speaking of things you scarcely understand." Radagast bristled, but Gandalf held up a hand to calm him. "The enemy has returned, Saruman," Gandalf said firmly. Not Sauron, but another. A sorcerer, ancient and powerful, one who once served him. His name is Morgul. Something flickered in Saruman's eyes at that name, but he masked it well. A servant of the Dark Lord, he mused. Yet, no mention of him has ever been made in all my studies. Because history has forgotten him, Gandalf countered. But Galadriel has not. He was there in a region before the fall. He learned from the great smiths, and he learned from Sauron himself. Now he seeks to reclaim what was lost. Saruman was silent for a long moment, then he sighed. Even if this Morgul exists, what would you have the council do? Raise an army? Hunt him across Middle-earth? We are not kings, Gandalf. We do not rule. We do not need to rule, Gandalf said. We need to act. Before Saruman could respond, another figure emerged from the trees, dressed in elegant robes of deep blue and silver. Lord Elrond. His presence was a relief to Gandalf. Elrond had fought against Sauron himself, and his wisdom had always been steadfast. I have heard much already, Elrond said, stepping forward. And I have no doubt that Mithrandir speaks the truth. A darkness is rising. Saruman turned to him. You, too, would stir fear among our kind? Elrond's gaze was unwavering. Not fear. Awareness. At that moment, another presence entered the valley. A radiant glow shimmered between the trees as Galadriel arrived, her elven attendants behind her. The meeting of the White Council had begun. They gathered in a circle beneath the ancient trees, where the light of the stars above cast a silver glow upon them. Gandalf, Radagast, Saruman, Elrond, and Galadriel, each a guardian of Middle-earth in their own way. Gandalf stepped forward, his voice firm. Morgul seeks to rise. He is not yet at full strength, but he will be soon. He commands the wraiths that once served Sauron, and he has learned magic that could threaten the very fabric of the world. Galadriel spoke next, her voice like music yet filled with authority. The visions of the mirror confirm what Mithrandir has seen. The shadow that lingers in Dol Guldur is not a remnant, it is a new beginning. Morgul has not fled. He is gathering. Elrond folded his hands before him. If we do not act, he may become as great a threat as Sauron himself. There was a heavy silence. Then, Saruman spoke, his voice slow and measured. And yet, we know so little of him. Where he hides. What he seeks. Even his true strength remains unknown. Gandalf studied Saruman closely. There was something strange in the way he spoke, something almost too deliberate. We must find out, Gandalf said, before it is too late. Saruman exhaled, as though weary of the discussion. And how do you propose we do that? Radagast, who had been silent for a time, finally spoke. We must return to Dol Guldur. Elrond turned to him. The ruins are empty. Radagast shook his head. No, they are not. Something remains there. Something that may tell us what Morgul is planning. Gandalf nodded. Then we go. We cannot afford to wait. Saruman let out a low hum of contemplation. Fools rush where wisdom hesitates. Gandalf met his gaze. And wisdom does not stand idle while darkness gathers. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Saruman waved a hand dismissively. Very well. If you are determined to chase shadows, do so. But do not expect me to waste my time on this errand. The council had spoken. The decision was made. Gandalf knew they had no choice but to return to the place where it all began. To Dol Guldur. The journey back to Dol Guldur was long and perilous, a march into the heart of shadow where no light willingly lingered. The White Council had spoken, but not all had agreed to act. Saruman had refused to join them, his skepticism, or perhaps something more, keeping him from aiding their cause. Elrond had returned to Rivendell to prepare its defenses should the darkness spread. Only Gandalf, Radagast, and a small company of elven warriors from Lothlorien rode toward the ruins of the necromancer's fortress. Gandalf felt the air grow colder as they neared their destination. The forest around them, once full of hidden dangers, was now eerily silent. Not a single bird sang, not a branch stirred. It was as if the world itself held its breath. Radagast rode beside him, his expression troubled. "Something is wrong," he murmured. "The land here, it feels as though it is waiting." Gandalf nodded grimly. "Morgul is expecting us." They did not slow their pace. If anything, they rode faster. The golden-haired elves of Lothlorien moved with silent precision, their bows ready, their blades keen. Galadriel had sent them not as a show of force, but as a final barrier against whatever evil lurked within Dol Guldur. When they reached the ruins, they dismounted. The ancient fortress loomed before them, its once mighty walls crumbling but still steeped in darkness. Gandalf could feel it, the lingering presence of something old, something terrible. The gates of Dol Guldur hung open, an invitation or a warning. "We go on foot from here," Gandalf said, gripping his staff. "Stay close." They moved cautiously through the broken halls. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting in unnatural ways. The elves walked in silence, their keen eyes scanning every corner, their bows drawn. Radagast held his staff tightly, his senses stretched toward the unseen forces around them. Then, a whisper. Not words, but something deeper. A presence. Gandalf turned sharply, his staff raised. "He is here." A gust of wind howled through the ruins, and the torches along the walls burst to life with sickly green flames. The shadows deepened, coiling like serpents along the floor. A dark figure stepped forward from the depths of the fortress. Morgul. He was taller than before, his form more solid, more present. His black robes moved as though alive, shifting like smoke caught in an unseen current. His face remained obscured beneath his hood, but the air around him pulsed with power. "I knew you would return," Morgul said, his voice like ice breaking over deep water. "You should not have." Gandalf stepped forward, his grip on his staff tightening. "We will not allow you to rise." Morgul laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "You mistake me, Mithrandir. I have already risen." He raised his hands, and the ruins trembled. From the depths of Dol Guldur, black mist poured forth, coalescing into shapes, twisted forms, wraiths that had once been men. The spirits of the fallen, bound to Morgul's will. The elves did not hesitate. Their arrows flew, striking the wraiths with deadly precision, but the spirits did not fall. They surged forward, their hollow eyes burning with unnatural fire. Radagast raised his staff, murmuring an incantation. A wave of golden light pulsed from him, driving back the wraiths for a moment. But only a moment. Morgul stepped forward, his power growing. You fight against inevitability, Gandalf. The world belongs to those strong enough to shape it. Gandalf met his gaze, his eyes burning with defiance. And those strong enough to protect it. With that, he struck the ground with his staff. A blinding light erupted from the point of impact, washing over the ruins in a wave of silver flame. The wraiths shrieked, their forms scattering like mist before a storm. Even Morgul staggered, his robes billowing as if caught in an unseen wind. But he did not fall. Morgul raised his hand, and darkness surged forth, clashing with Gandalf's light. The two forces met in the air, twisting and writhing in a battle neither could immediately win. Sparks of power crackled through the ruins, shattering stone and sending shockwaves through the earth. The elves fought desperately, blades flashing against the remaining wraiths. Radagast, his face lined with strain, continued his chant, calling upon the spirits of nature to aid them. Vines burst from the stone, ensnaring the shadowed forms, roots rising from the ground to pull them into the earth. But Morgul was not finished. With a guttural incantation, he slammed his staff against the floor. A deep, bone-rattling sound echoed through the ruins as the ground beneath them cracked. From the abyss, a monstrous figure began to rise, a creature of shadow and flame, its body wreathed in darkness. A thing of the old world. A Balrog. Even Gandalf's heart clenched at the sight. This was not the Balrog of Moria, but another, lesser perhaps in power but no less terrifying. Its eyes burned with hatred, and its claws dripped with molten fury. The elves faltered. Even Radagast took a step back. Morgul's voice rang through the ruins. You cannot stop me. The age of the Vala is over. The age of men, of elves, of your kind, it is ending. Gandalf clenched his jaw. Not while I still stand. He raised his staff, calling upon all the power left within him. Light erupted once more, but Morgul countered, his darkness crashing against Gandalf's magic like a storm upon a mountain. The battle of wills continued, neither yielding, neither retreating. Then Radagast moved. With a cry, he lifted his staff high, his connection to the earth surging through him. The very stones of Dol Guldur trembled in response. Vines shot forward, wrapping around the Balrog's limbs, pulling it back. The elves, seeing their chance, loosed their arrows in unison, striking Morgul directly. For the first time, he faltered. Gandalf seized the moment. Summoning every ounce of power he had left, he cast forth a final wave of light, one that engulfed the ruins in a brilliance that could be seen for miles. The Balrog roared in pain. The wraiths screamed as they were torn apart. And Morgul let out a sound of fury, of pure, unbridled rage, before his form was consumed by the light. When the brilliance faded, Dol Guldur was silent. The wraiths were gone. The Balrog had vanished. And Morgul. Nothing remained of him but the tattered remnants of his robes, drifting away like ash in the wind. Gandalf let out a slow breath. His staff was cracked, his strength nearly spent. But they had one. Radagast placed a hand on his shoulder. Is it over? Gandalf looked out over the ruins. The darkness had lifted. The land no longer held its breath. The world, for now, was safe. For now, Gandalf murmured. But darkness never truly dies. Radagast sighed. Then we will be here when it returns. Gandalf nodded. He looked toward the east, where the dawn was beginning to break. For now, at least, Middle-earth had been given another chance. And as long as those who would fight for its light remained, the darkness would never fully claim it. The echoes of battle fade into the wind, carried away like whispers of an old song. The ruins of Dol Guldur stand silent once more, their shadows no longer stretching so far, no longer reaching for the light. The danger has passed, for now. But in Middle-earth, the struggle between light and darkness is never truly over. Gandalf, weary yet unwavering, turns his gaze to the horizon. The world is still vast, still filled with both wonder and peril. But for this moment, there is peace. A moment to breathe. A moment to rest. Let the warmth of this tale settle within you, like embers glowing softly in the dark. Let the hush of the night carry you into dreams, where stories live on and adventures never truly end. The stars still shine above, watching over Middle-earth, just as they watch over you. And as the night deepens, the world grows quiet once more. Sleep now, knowing that even in the darkest hours, there will always be those who stand against the coming storm.